Etapu, Assalamu alaikum, Namaste Harun Nefer. This is Qesankh Ma Kaparu with a special video or exclusive video for my Patreon supporters. In this video, we're going to be reviewing the book by Ra'u Nefa Amin called An African Guide to a Spiritual Union. But before I get into that, I would like you to hit the like button on this video. And also, if this is your first time to my channel, which it shouldn't be, you can hit that subscribe button to get notifications when I go live, when I upload recorded videos. And again, thank you for becoming a Patreon supporter. This is the Ma Book Club. And as you know, what we try to do is every month come out with a new book that we review together to further our spiritual knowledge. Now, this book in particular, I read a little while back, and it was something that was a revelation to me because for the first time I saw how relationships in the African-centered society were very different than Western relationships. So it really surprised me, and it really illuminated a lot of things that, I didn't understand at first. And it gave me a good insight as to what was going on with my own personal relationships, why they were wrong, what was going wrong with that. So I want to take a look at this this first My Book Club session, go into just a little bit and talk about, before we get into the book, the what's really going on. It's very hard for me to kind of like pinpoint this and say this, but I want to really talk about what's happening in today's society in terms of relationships, because it's a very touchy subject. I don't want to be insensitive to anyone's plight or anyone's decisions, but at the same time, I feel compelled to speak the truth on what's happening. So let's get into this and kind of navigate around the most important things that we need to look at. All right. First and foremost, in order for us to understand what's happening with relationships today, we must understand that in terms of, I would say the term minority relationships, we have to understand the fact that a lot of that is being interfered with. You see, the ruling elite, the cabal, has a plan, which is depopulation. In order to do that, they have to create so-called special interest groups, which they inject into minority societies with particular types of outlooks, perspectives, or ideologies. And those ideologies there are implanted to break up the nuclear family, the family unit. See, they don't want a functional family, healthy, normal, and producing offspring. That's not what they want. They want, in particular, dysfunction, a separation, a breakup of the family. And they have really got this down to a science, where they've figured out that they know if they empower women, and at the same time in doing that, remove power from men, that they can set the stage up for a fall of the family. And there's various stages in their goal. All right. One stage is to switch to gender roles. The next stage after that is to not have genders at all. Next stage after that is sadomasochistic rituals and beliefs and things like that. So they're heading in that direction. Now, with all of their plans for the family unit, they use minorities as like the canary in the coal mine to see or do a beta test and see how the introduction of this new ideology or philosophy will work out. And within the minority community, they have done that really well, especially in the African American community, where they have empowered Black women with the idea of feminism, but not just feminism, but a very, very extreme and perverted form of feminism, to where you get the women to hate the men with or with of bile, or I would say just disrespect and empower them by giving them positions, status. And when you do that and create a prison industrial complex where you lock up the majority of Black men, you then will see how the family structure falls apart. And one of the things that we're seeing promoted in TV programs is a lot of especially commercials, a lot of interracial relationships. Well, there's a plan to that. You know what I mean? Even though when you look at statistics, you'll see that most Black men making over $100,000 marry Black women. You know, a large, and that interracial relationships only account for less than 3% of African American relationships. You know, such a low number, but they feed through agent provocateurs. They feed the communities these real crazy notions. One of the notions is that Black males are part of the patriarchy of the oppressors, even though Black males don't have any power. And there's no patriarchy in the Black community. Black males, for example, date white women, even though the statistics are against that. And these are put in place not by your typical everyday Black women, but they are put in place by agent provocateurs to stir to stir hatred and bitterness between the gender, thus creating a gender war. Now, but if we take a step back and we try to see, and it's very difficult because we get wrapped up in like emotionalism, and unfortunately that emotionalism is very prevalent in minority communities because most minority communities are in survival mode because the ruling elite knows that if they could, economically oppress them and then put all the things in their community like liquor stores and drugs and things of that nature, they won't think critically and analytically. So what they will do is they'll appeal to your emotions, and that further fuels the fire of the so-called gender war. And before you know it, you have the two. The two couples at each other's throats. And make no mistake, the same thing is happening with the white community. We have seen this with the so-called Me Too movement. And one of the things that I try to tell filmmakers or people who are up and coming screenwriters is that, if you take a look at what's going on in Hollywood, it would almost seem like every studio is on the same page. That's because they're receiving their marching orders from the ruling elite who controls Hollywood. And those marching orders are to put more women in lead roles in films, to degrade, debase, and make white males look like idiots and the cause of all the world's problems. And do the same with the African American community. Give Black women more roles like 007, Batgirl, and criminalize Black men. So you can see that this is clearly taking place. It's clearly happening, and it's not by accident that the universities are increasing the enrollment of women. The universities are teaching more feminist programs. So we see that males are being hit left and right with this subversive tactic, and it's using women by proxy to execute their nefarious plan. And one of the things that was greatly under attack and still is the notion of community or of African relationships. Even in universities, the anthropologists and the historians will teach you how primitive African relationships or marriages or communities were. But if you really take a look at them in antiquity, how they really and truly existed, there was a high sense of morality. Even though you may be looking at it and seeing polygamous relationships, it was still done from a community and respect and high moral regard. And you won't see the same things you see as in Western society, like high rate of divorce, domestic violence. You don't see those things in African relationships, traditional African relationship, because at the core of that was spirituality. And spirituality was a part of the everyday practice, and it wasn't just a go to Sunday school type of thing, or go to church on Sundays, and that'll be it. And you will notice that in ancient Kemet and most African societies, women were given um, more rights and privileges than you had um, in the European societies. So European women were lagging behind African women. African women had the right to divorce, the right to inheritance, things of that nature, where European women didn't at the time, or didn't. So for these historians to come along and talk about the primitive nature of African relationships is totally incorrect. And one of the interesting things that the book really illuminated for me was the concept of what is love, what is attraction, and which is really blew my mind, when I read it. So let's, I spoke a little bit about what's going on in the arena, what the ruling elite is trying to do. And I truly believe that if the relationships were left alone, we would get back to where we were, but they're not. The ruling elite is bent on interfering and destroying relationships. Again, using the woman as the proxy for their plans. So I want to take a dive right now into the book. If you haven't gotten the book, this is only the first Mod Book Club where we're going to be dealing with this book, so you'll have an opportunity to purchase it. You can get it on Amazon and what have you. Let us read the author's preface. I think it's very interesting. So let's go into that real quick here. The family is the embryo of society and civilization. It is the place where we find man in his or her most formidable and moldable state of being. Formative and mobile state of being. Moldable. There is no other place, not even church or school, that can equal or better the opportunity and conditions for shaping the behavior of individual into harmonious member of society and civilization. Which is, that's true. um, it is safe to conclude that if the family institution of a nation is in trouble, the nation is doomed to failure. And if the problem were to spread to the rest of the world, then we would be looking at a catastrophic, I have trouble with that word, catastrophe of global proportions. Now, a strong argument can be made for the case that this is well on its way. The fact that the majority of crimes, especially in the industrial developed nations of the West, are being carried out by youths between 12 and 25 can be cited as possible evidence of a massive failure in parenting. The argument gains strength once we further consider the present rates of teenage pregnancy, teenage drug addiction, school dropouts, teen suicide, runaways, etc. The works of many sociologists and writers have expressed understanding and the concern that goes with it. While some scholars have thrown in the towel, proclaiming that the family is a dead institution, many have been searching laboriously for the causes and solutions to the state of the family. By their own admission, most experts on the subject confess their failure to come up with a comprehensive solution to the problem. It is my intention in this book to lay the foundation for what I claim to be just that, a comprehensive solution to the problem. I base my work on a simple premise. If you have a problem, it is possible that someone else in the world has that same problem and came up with the solution. So I searched around the world and found that many societies, ancient and contemporary, have managed to avoid the problems that are destroying the Western family institution. All of these societies, as it turned out, outside of the Western culture. It is obvious that most experts have not thought it worth their time, energy, or scholarly status to look toward the non-Western nations to learn how to solve their most important social problem. It is part of a well-known pattern of cultural arrogance characterized by the Western scholars' belief that only from the West can solutions come to all of mankind's problem. And that is a pervasive problem, is that the West is so ego-centered and thinks that all of the prominent scientists, all the prominent thinkers, inventors came out of Western society, and that's not true. The cultural expressions of the non-Western world are therefore not studied under the headings of psychology, sociology, or religion, but under cults, mythology, and anthropology. Ooh, very, very good point. Let me read that again. The cultural expressions of the non-Western world are therefore not studied under the headings of psychology or sociology or religion, but under cults, mythology, and anthropology. Had Western scholars taken the proper look at what other cultures had to offer in reference to the family and other social institutions, they would have found that by comparison, what they have been doing wrong all along. Let's take a look at some of these before looking into the non-Western approach. One of the reasons for the failure of Westerners to identify the true causes of the problem, let alone the solutions, the typical Western segregative approach to things. It is seen in the segregation of nutrition from medicine and healing. It is restricted view that education only takes place in the classroom, so all hell can break loose over the movies and the TV screens. They swear that the latter has no relation to the increasing rate of rape, violence, teenage pregnancy, etc. Yet they sink billions into the advertising kitty each year, a formidable investment of faith and money in a vehicle that is not supposed to work. In reference to the family, this segregative approach can be seen on the focus of research and discussion that is usually narrow to a sociological or psychological perspective. It ignores the valuable input from history to a problem that pertains specifically to the members composing the family. It ignores the influence of culture, government, church, schools, and etc. In this book, it will be seen how Western man took this segregative attitude to its ugliest limits. The failure of the Western males to perceive the abstract ties and equality between themselves and their own women caused them to establish a policy of inhumane oppression of white women, which to this day is still continuing. We will see that since the family is a partnership entity with all that it implies about equality, and given the fact that the white male has failed to treat his mate as a partner, the Western world has failed to develop a wholesome family institution. The white man and the white woman have wasted 4,000 years combating each other instead of investing their genius, time, and energy in the development of a valuable and harmonious family institution. Another reason for the failure of Westerners to identify the true causes of the problem will be discussed in this work, as it is the central theme of the book. It is based on the position that the behavior of the majority of people is shaped by their culture. And although marital discords are generally viewed as originating in the individuals themselves, they are in reality the logical expressions of the cultural beliefs, customs that have been inculcated into them. Experts in the West have failed to uncover the full extent of the influence from culture for the simple fact that they themselves have accepted, hence failed to question many of the cultural elements that are damaging to the family tradition. Since culture operates in reference to behavior as a causal factor, the failure to fully note its influence complicates the problem even more, as effects are mistaken for causes. In direct opposition to the Western cultural approach, we find the practices of non-Western nations, especially Africa, whose measures for the avoidance of social problems I have proposed in this book as solutions to the Western family problem, hence the title, An African Centric Guide to a Spiritual Union. Afrocentricity does not merely indicate an African source. It is a way of seeing the world that is just the opposite of the Western way of looking at the world. It is therefore a totally opposite way of life. We see that the Western Eurocentric way of life strictly follows the typical segregative way of thinking described earlier as an opposite way of life. We will find that the African perspective is holistic in nature. The principles of religion, to be valid, have to agree with those of science, philosophy, and government. In reality, there is no agreement but unity, as they are all based on a common theoretical foundation. So I want you to understand that even the very way in which Europeans think, including the white male with his left brain thinking, is the very origin of his problem between his relationships with white women. He has segregated and relegated her position to such a degree that she has to like a pendulum, swing back and to fight to gain any measure of prominence or position of power within the relationship. Whereas you see in African societies, African women were treated on an equal basis. And we didn't have these same issues that you're having today in the Western world. Where you see problems in African society today are from the injection of a Western ideology. That's what's causing the problem. You'll see that. All right, so let's continue. Thus, in this book is given a detailed presentation of the spiritual cultural elements that gave Africa a stable family institution that can be traced beyond the dawn of the historical period, the past 6,000 years. The claims of effectiveness for the principles have been supported with an ample amount of historical documentation, of which, it must be noted, most researchers into sociological issues tend to neglect. As a result, they fail to avoid putting forth theories wasting and sometimes destroying people's lives that are eventually found to be contradicted by reality, historical, and empirical knowledge. I'm going to go back and read that again. As a result, they fail to avoid putting forth such theories, wasting and sometimes destroying people's lives that are eventually found to be contradicted by reality, historical, and empirical. One such theory is the popular belief that there was a time that family in the West was wholesome and stable. All that's needed to be done now, we are told, is to return to those good old teachings and good old days. We will see that such a position could not have been arrived at from the study of the historical facts. The historical facts, as we will see, show the exact opposite. And we kind of are very nostalgic and we look back on those good old days of the 50s and the 40s, is that when the family was stable and everything was wholesome, apple pie, good communities, good neighborhoods, but that's simply not true. No, we will see that the solution to the family problem is not in a return to the good old West, but the timeless wisdom of Africa. And that was Ra Nefer Amen. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Again, I want to say to the fact that, you know, we can go through the book, and this book is just full of wisdom. But one of the things eventually we're going to have to tackle is the intervention by the ruling elite, by society, into these relationships, because they're hell bent on destroying them. And we are going to have to cut that channel off, or else we may take measures to fix our relationships, but they'll only change their diabolical plan and interject something different and new. Because they're very dynamic and fluid in their plans to corrupt us. So let's keep that in mind. Chapter 1, Culture, the fundamental cause and solution of the problems in the relationship of men and women. And also, I want to say this. I want to say that this is not about Africa and African so-called relationships and religion. If something works, use it. Bruce Lee even said that, you know. So I don't care what culture you come from. If you can extrapolate from this and find things that can help your relationship, then adapt them. You know, we see in the minority community women sleeping with different men, having babies by different baby daddies. Well, if you have polygamy, then you would have one man, and he will be taking on these different women and being accountable, and financially taking care of these kids. But because the Western world wants to paint polygamy and other forms of relationships negatively, you don't consider this, but it endorses the baby mama drama. And it allows these things, which in traditional African culture, the women and the men would be shamed. They would be cast out for doing and operating in this way. Men cannot go around producing babies by different women. Women can't go around having babies by different men. That was simply not acceptable in traditional African communities and relationships. But you'll see how this society um, thrives on that and even financially rewards women for doing that. And there's a reason for that, because they want to destroy the family unit. When you are at such an ego where you think you can be both the mother and the father, you're going to ruin the child. You're going to ruin the community. You're going to ruin the race. And the ruling elite know this, and they endorse this. Yes, you can be both. Let's continue. The fish in a fish farm are chronically ill with sores because the water is polluted. The professional fish doctors, even though they have never cured a single fish, have determined that the cause of the sores is germ infection and proceeded to introduce antibiotics into the feed of the fish. It is obvious that they will not cure the fish because they are treating an effect and not the root cause. Perhaps they have failed to investigate the condition of the matter, because their scientific training has convinced them with thousands of statistical proofs that the cause of the sores is infection by germs. The above is helpful illustration of the fundamental cause of the relationship and the marital problems of people in the Western world. It is the premise of the study that the culture is the chief determinant of behavior of the majority of people in a given society. And culture is so important. It is so important because this determines how people will conduct themselves. You see, you have young men walking around with their pants hanging down, which has no useful purpose, which is uh, culturally destructive and dysfunctional. But yet society allows that, the community allows that, because you have removed the males from positions of authority. We can liken the uh, polluted water of the fish farm to the erroneous aspects of culture, which would be the fundamental causes of the errors in behavior of the majority of the population. The limitation of the diagnosis of the problem to an effect is ignorance of the root cause can be likened to men blaming family problems on women's shortcoming and vice versa, putting the blame on financial difficulties, sexual problems, and other effects of the real cause. The view that culture is the main cause of relationship problems is supported by the growing epidemic of broken marriages over the past 30 years, and the epidemic restricted to Western and westernized portions of non-Western nations nature of the problem. The details in this book will make this point clear. Before we can proceed, we must, definition of culture. Definition of culture. Before we can proceed, we must clarify what culture is and is not. Most people fail to examine culture as the fundamental source of the behavior of the majority of people because they have been trained to think of culture as specifically pertaining to the arts, music, painting, literature, etc. To gain a clear understanding of the term culture, we must reference it with its opposite, wild things that live and grow in their original natural state. The term culture pertains then to a group of terms that include agriculture, cultivate, cult, and cultivation. A cultivated plant not known in the wild form, etc. Running through all of these terms is the idea of human effort and influence of the growth of something away from its natural or wild form. The object in every case is to improve, refine, customize, and so on. Culture then is a set of ideas and agencies used to change the wild behavior in people into the refined social qualities that are required to bring about an harmonious and stable, hence prosperous society. We can conclude correctly that problems in society are caused by wild behavior patterns that have escaped the acculturation process for whatever reason. We will look at these as we go on. It is enough now to note that the behavior characterizing the childhood of humans can be classified as wild, and to the degree that these can be changed through the cultivation of proper behavioral patterns, we determine the degree of harmony in society and the success of its various institutions, family, and government. With the above definition of culture in mind, we can see then that culture is shaping of growth and behavior, if properly understood by a society, is the goal of religion and education. The thoughtful will realize that the understanding is not consistent, present, or applied in many religious and educational institutions. An analysis will show many of them to excuse, uphold, and even promote wild behavior. Were not the Nazis, slave traders, etc., among the best educated in the world? Such behavior will then become impregnated into the other institutions of man, government, marriage, economics, and so on. We will see that the fundamental causes of marital problems in the Western world must be laid at the feet of the institutions, religious and educational, in charge of shaping, cultivating the behavior of people, as well as the other main social institutions, governmental, economical, as they are reinforcers of the negative behavior patterns that create the social framework that doomed interpersonal relationships to failure. In a divorce proceeding, it becomes fair to examine the shortcomings of the individuals in the marriage only after the cultural framework has been shown to be effective in properly guiding the behavior of the people at large. It is correct to treat individual fish after you have cleaned the water. And this is a problem in the Western world where it typically blames the individual for aberrant behavior, dysfunctionalism, but it doesn't look at the society that endorsed this dysfunctional behavior. This society promotes cheating. This society promotes the idea of removing men from positions of power. This idea promotes this society promotes the idea that women, no matter what they look like, how much they weigh, should be able to have access to a Prince Charming. So there's a lot of like wrong thinking which contributes to problems in a relationship. And if you see in the Western world, most divorces are initiated by women because women have been allowed to have these standards that are somewhat unreasonable in men. They think they can get a man that's 6 feet tall, makes six figures, who's willing to take care of them so they don't have to work. It's all these unreasonable demands instead of seeing a relationship as a partnership where they're both working together to build an institution. Causes and sources of cultural errors. Before we can undertake the task of cleaning up the host of cultural malformations, we must first have clear insight into the causes and sources of cultural errors. This can be arrived at by cultural comparisons using an accurate model of man's makeup. This approach, which will be undertaken in future chapters, will show that the erroneous formulations of cultural elements originate from the placement of the cultural shaping factors in the hands of people not qualified for the task. We must also look at the fact that the population, when it's so interesting because when we say that these individuals in charge of guiding our society, especially family relationships, are not qualified, that is so true. You look at ministers in some of these mega churches talking about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, how you should be treating your mate, how you shouldn't be treating your mate, when they are the ones that are doing all of this negative things behind the scenes, having these extramarital affairs, having gay relationships, even though they stand on their pulpit and preach against that. So we cannot look to these individuals in the religious institutions as a measure of morality. We must also look at the fact that the population, for the most part, fails to detect these errors in cultural formulations. An inherent aspect of culture is that it represents the beliefs that people hold in common. There is something in the nature of people in the early part of their spiritual growth that promotes the indiscriminate imitation of behavior and beliefs of the majority. And there is that aspect, which is the Osset aspect, ISIS, where your early stages of your development, you indiscriminately imitate what you see and what you hear. And we find that most people in our society have not evolved to be above that. They indiscriminately imitate others, and that produces a type of dysfunctional cultural norm. One girl has a baby by two different men, and the other girls praise her. So then other girls think it's okay, and they do the same, and it becomes a cultural norm, and that's not good. One young man walks with his jeans hanging down. Other men see it and they think it's really kind of cool, and they emulate that. That is the indiscriminate imitation, and that's the Osset faculty, and it's wrong. You're supposed to rise above it. You see that faculty of indiscriminate imitation is for the very, very young, because that's how they learn in the very early stages of development, through indiscriminate imitation. There is something in the nature of people in the early part of their spiritual growth that promotes the indiscriminate imitation of behavior and beliefs of the majority. In this way, culture has a way of endorsing incorrect behavior. For example, beyond the fact that smoking is very harmful, it serves no beneficial purpose. People get into it merely from imitative behavior. We will see that the same can be found with the practice of falling in love, kissing, etc. The importance in this revelation is to be found in the ironic fact that the very same persons that are active in the forefront to find solutions to social problems are unwittingly the starchest defenders of the cultural elements that are at the root of the problems. In the essence of love, for example, is giving selfishly or sacrificing for others. How can it then be equated with something that you can fall in and out of? And this is true for relationships. Listen, if you love your mate and you get a divorce, and then you're concerned about her taking your money or getting possession of the kids, how is it that you professed you were in love? You weren't in love, because love is giving, seeking nothing in return. Loving is loving someone, irrespective if they love you back. Think about that. That's the highest form of love. That's ma'at. And we have confused love with attraction in our society. We have confused love with lust. So we jump into a marriage with no education prior on what love is. No one has gone to the temple of Ma'at and become educated on love. And it's a sad state of affairs. You know. So let me read it again. If the essence of love, for example, is giving, seeking, or sacrificing for others, how can it then be equated with something that you can fall in and out of? Having spotted this discrepancy between selfishness and the self-interest that accompanies most cases of falling in love, are you now ready to give up this mode of behavior? Cultural reformation, the solution to the problem. Seeing that the main blame of the cause of marital problems must be laid on the errors in the culture, we must conclude that the solutions to these problems must be sought in the reformation of the culture. It to give an example, 3% of the population comes down with an illness. You will look into the constitution and lifestyle of the sick individuals. On the other hand, if 50% of the population comes down with the same illness, you must look not at the individuals, but for some social or environmental cause of the problem. According to Statistical Abstract of the United States for 1991, published by the U.S. Department of Commerce, the average duration of marriages in the U.S. from 1970 to 1987 was 7 years. The average age at divorce was early to mid 30s. The average rate of marriages for 1980 to 1989 was 10 per 1,000 population, while the divorce rate, not including most annulments, legal separations, and unofficial separations, was 5 per 1,000 population, 50% of the marriage rate. A horrendous epidemic indeed. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we have a group problem at hand. The cause of the problem stems from beliefs and customs we hold in common. The laying of blame cannot continue to be made on an individual basis in the divorce courts. The solution must be group action. It is time to drag Western culture into divorce court. And that is so right, so on point. If you have statistically, most marriages are doing fine and there's some divorce, that's fine. But statistically, if you have 90% or whatever, like 70%, not doing well, then you have to look at the conditions that are impacting those relationships. And that's what we have failed to do, because we live in a left brain society that doesn't look at the root cause, but look at the symptoms. It is the same thing when you look at most minority communities where you see behavior which they consider is wrong, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, crime. Well, if this is a pervasive problem in minority communities across the United States, let's look at the system that you have in place, which is unfair, it's equal, and it's oppressive. And it creates the conditions for this behavior, but they refuse to do so. Instead, they create the prison industrial complex to lock up people, knowing full well that they are the ones that are creating the problems. That the society as a whole is sick and not the race, not the individuals. But this is what we're having with the marriages and relationships. It is blaming the individuals for a cultural problem, for a mass media problem, which is promoting dysfunctionalism. But they don't want to be held accountable for that, you see, because it brings in to focus a bigger problem. And as you'll see, the author has done a great job, and he'll get deeper into that as we go into the book, how it all leads back to this frame of thinking of the Western mindset. And I've always said, if you want to get rid of sexism and racism, inequality, you've got to have integrated brain thinking. That's the only way it's going to happen. External law is only coercion. And those things, when those laws are not in place or not there, the people will still drop back to acting in a negative way until you change the vibrational frequency of how they think and how they conduct themselves. That is through the induction of spirituality, not religion, but spirituality. That is the induction of meditation, trance, bringing that back into the picture because it was removed from the picture by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 325 AD because they wanted to put the world into left brain conscious waking state process. And this is why everything that is of non-Western origin, religion, community, family, is always vilified in media, always vilified in academic circles. It is done so for a reason. So I want to thank you for tuning into this. So this broadcast is intended for those in my Patreon supporters. So next week we may keep this exclusively for Patreon. So if you're not a member, please join. That's where most of the Mod Book Club's videos will be for your reference. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll see you next Sunday, 7 p.m., same time, same bat channel. This is Qesankh Ma Keperu, son of Ma and Tahuti. Ma is a beautiful goddess Heteru. Until my next video, Amen Ra.